Really appreciate that. Sounded beautiful. Sometimes we are surprised at when we take on a project. Sometimes for example, you may have been thinking about replacing your flooring, and you begin to peel back the layer of carpet or linoleum or tile or whatever it is, and then lo and behold, you discover another issue. And then you tear back that layer of subfloor, and then you find out there's more to it. And then you begin to replace the joists, and you crawl underneath the house, and then you discover there's something going on the other side of the house too. And so it grows and it grows and it grows. This morning you're going to see that the rejection of Jesus was far, and it was also near. It was something that was widespread. Open your Bibles this morning to the book of Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, and we're coming to the last little pericope of chapter 13. It is when Jesus goes home. He goes home to Nazareth, and we're going to see how he is received. He has moved from teaching the crowds and the disciples by the seaside and in the house, and now he is going back to his hometown of Nazareth. Follow along with me as I read beginning at verse 53. Matthew chapter 13, beginning at verse 53. And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed thence. And when he was come into his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished, and said, Whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man all these things? And when they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. At that time Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he had put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger, and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came, and took up the body, and buried it, and went and told Jesus. This morning we're going to hear the thoughts about Jesus. We're going to hear the reactions to Jesus. How is Jesus being accepted? How are people either looking to Jesus or looking away from Jesus? And this morning we're going to hear from two vastly different groups of people. We're going to hear in this first little pericope from the people, the ordinary person of Nazareth, a small little village, an insignificant place, and we're going to hear their reaction. But we're also going to hear from the reaction of someone of high status, someone who is a ruler. He is a major figure in the people's lives of the people of Israel and also in the Roman Empire. His name is Herod Antipas. Today you're going to see that Jesus was rejected by His own people, but He was also rejected by people who didn't know Him. He was raised in Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. They were returning to the area where Joseph was from, and Joseph and Mary had lived. These were the people that Jesus knew the best. And so we see here that He comes home. He comes home after leaving Nazareth. We saw that back in chapter 4, and how He had gone to Galilee. He had set up His new home was in Capernaum, and now He comes back for a visit. And notice what happens here. And Matthew brings us along in the story in verse 53, and he says there, "And it came to pass that when Jesus finished teaching in these parables, that He finished delivering these parables, that He departed from there." And it says that He comes in and He arrives in the city of Nazareth. And it tells us right off the bat that His purpose for coming back, it's not a wedding this time. It is not to visit a family member this time. He comes back to teach. He is just following His mission that God had given Him. God had given Jesus a mission, and now He is sharing the message of God and His message with His hometown people. We would expect that He would be received very well. Hometown boy who is the star quarterback for the football team has left home. He's admired by his hometown, and he comes back and he is a success. He is famous throughout the land, and we would expect Jesus to be received rather warmly. It says there that we start off well, doesn't it? He comes to teach them, and then their reaction is that they are astonished. They are, I like to use this phrase, they are beside themselves, aren't they? They are just taken back at what they are seeing. This is Jesus, and we are amazed, we are astonished by what we are hearing from this man. Notice in what they are astonished, there are two where questions. Take note of that. Where? Where is this coming from? Where did you get these things? Notice what it says there at the end of verse 54. They are astonished, and we are thinking first off that this is a good thing. They are astonished and they are going to receive Him. But it begins to turn a little sour. Notice that at the end of verse 54, they ask, whence or where hath this man this wisdom? Where is the source of his wisdom and these mighty works? I guess the highlight here, the good thing is that Jesus' wisdom and His mighty works are recognizable. That is an obvious fact, isn't it? But what they want to do with it, we recognize that you have this wisdom. We recognize that you can do these mighty works. But where did you get it from? Notice the second where question. It's at the end of verse 56. They say, whence then hath this man all these things? It's really a clarification of the first question, isn't it? We would think, well, this is a good thing. They acknowledge His mighty works. They acknowledge His wisdom. And we are just so astonished that it surpasses all of the teaching of a typical rabbi. He is in their synagogue and he is delivering these messages, and it is obvious that he has wisdom and that he can do mighty works. And then they ask again, where did you get all of these things? Where did this man get all of these things? There is a time for decision here, isn't there? There is a time to either accept that this is of God or this is of another source. Notice the questions in between. This is really what is the background and what is informing them to ask these questions. They say, is not this the carpenter's son? This is the son of Joseph. We remember when he was working with his daddy, when he was a little boy and he learned the trade, and he would come over and he would work on things with his dad. This was who he really is. He is not a man of wisdom and one of mighty works, but he is really, his identity is the carpenter's son. But then it gets even more filled out. They begin to talk about his family. It aren't his brothers. We know his brothers and his sisters, and we know his mother. Isn't his mother called Mary? Aren't his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, aren't they not all with us? You see, what is clouding their mind here is the identity of Jesus. They know Jesus from when he was a little boy. They know Jesus based upon his family. They know Jesus based upon how his dad raised him and taught him these things. But now he looks different and he sounds different. Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty deeds? And where did he get all these things from? Well, is it from God? Or is it from another source? You remember that it was the Pharisees who said that he got his authority to cast out devils from Beelzebul or Satan. They didn't believe that his authority came from God. And now he comes to Nazareth. Now he comes to his hometown, and they are asking similar questions. They are stumbling. They are staggering. They are stopped cold over where did he get these things. You say, well, you're making a big deal. I am making a big deal about it, because look at the next phrase in verse 57. It says, and they were offended in him. This is their decision. This little phrase right here, it's a word that it can be translated scandal. It is also a word that can be translated to mean something like stumbling block. It was something that got in their way. When they heard the message of Jesus, they acknowledged that there was wisdom there, and there are mighty works there, and this doesn't seem like the Jesus that we knew from long ago. So let me take a time out here. I don't want to get off in the weeds too much, but so much for the little fairy tales and the cute, funny humor about Jesus as a child making things and playing tricks on his family and doing miracles and uncontrollably not being able to control his powers of God. They didn't know Jesus like that. Apparently, he didn't do things like that. That's all a fiction of people's imagination. They knew him as a hard-working son of Joseph, and they knew his family. And by the way, these communities were tight, much tighter than our communities today. This was a helping society. If you were living in a small village, in a small community in first century Palestine, you would be sharing almost everything. There was no Walmart Supercenter. There was no Home Depot. There was no Lowe's. One person would be in charge of raising this kind of livestock. Another would be raising this crop, and another would be a carpenter. Another would be some kind of stone artisan. And they would all share their trades with one another and trade out. It was a bartering society. They were intimately aware of one another. Where did this Jesus get these things? This is new to us. And they were offended in him. This can't be. This can't be from God. It is either from God or it is from some other source. But this can't be from God. This is not what we know of Jesus. Jesus couldn't be empowered by God. Well, notice what Jesus responds with. He says, a prophet is not without honor save in his own country and in his own house. And we have this double negative here, not without honor. It means they don't have honor in their own country. This is a proverb that Jesus is explaining. This old proverb, this proverbial saying, applies to me. It applies to Jesus. And He's saying, I am following in the mold of the prophets who have been rejected by Israel. I'm thinking about, off the top of my head, a prophet like Elijah, who was rejected by many of his own people. Prophets like Jeremiah, who no one believed anything that Jeremiah said. Isaiah prophesied for decades, and people did not accept the message that God was sending through the prophet Isaiah. And Jesus says, just like the old prophets that Israel had rejected, they are rejecting me as well. And notice the result here at the end of the verse. And He did not many mighty works due to their unbelief. We had said a few messages ago about the miracles that Jesus did in chapters 11 and 12. It is not that Jesus could not, it's that He would not. We remember, and you remember the verses that talked about that Jesus, it fulfilled the saying that He would not be one crying in the street. They demanded a sign from Him. You remember that text? They demanded a sign, and He said, there will be no sign given. Jesus is not going to put on a show and have to prove who He is by doing these mighty works. He does His mighty works out of a compassion and a response of faith. Because of their lack of faith, there was no need to do any mighty works there. It's not that He could not, it's that He would not. Notice there, before we leave, and I touched on it a while ago, is that the people's rejection of Jesus is because they let all of their preconceived ideas get in the way of believing in Jesus. They saw Him as the little boy that they knew. They saw Him as an ordinary person, and social status was so important back then. If you weren't from the family of the priesthood, if you weren't from some upper echelon realm of society, there is no way that God would ever choose an ordinary villager from Nazareth to do these mighty works. There must be an alternate explanation for this. And they let all of those things get in the way of believing in the Son of Man, the Messiah. So He was rejected by people that knew Him best. While all this is occurring, notice there in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 14, we see the ideas and the conclusions that Herod has come to. You know, this is Herod Antipas. He was a ruler over Galilee and Perea, a fourth of the kingdom. That's why it's called the Tetrarch. His daddy was the Herod that tried to kill Jesus at the beginning of his life. He had a brother who was named Philip, a half-brother actually, and he was married to Herodias. And Herodias and Herod Antipas started to have an attraction for one another, and so they divorced their wives. It ended up that Herod Antipas had to fight a war with his wife's family, and he was nearly killed until the Roman army came and rescued him. And so he was able to follow through with his little tryst with his half-brother's wife, and they got married. Notice here in verses 1 and 2, it says, at that time, at around the same time, this Herod Antipas heard of the fame of Jesus. Take note of that. He had heard about Jesus. And so what are you going to do with it? Are you going to do what the Nazarite villagers did with it and question it? Are you going to do what the Pharisees did with it and attribute it to the work of Satan? Look what he says. He said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist. Well, it's not John the Baptist. You know, when you read that little phrase there, this is John the Baptist, he has risen from the dead, it sounds so eloquently written, sometimes you'll read over that fast and you'll think, well, this is God's truth right here. No, it's not. This is the fiction of Herod's imagination that Jesus is so powerful, he attributes his power and his influence and his ability to do mighty works to be a reincarnated John the Baptist. Why is he thinking that? Well, it says there at the end of the verse, or in verse 3, it says, and therefore mighty works do show themselves in him. He has attributed all of the fame and the mighty works of Jesus to being a reincarnated John the Baptist. And here is the reason. You'll see it unfold here in this long story of verses 3 through 12 about John being put to death. This is why he had let these things creep in his mind. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him. May I say right here at the very beginning, it's because he is being haunted by his terrible decision to do this. I say haunted. It sounds kind of dramatic when I say that. He has a guilty conscience. He knew that it wasn't right. Just like Pilate and Pilate's wife, when Jesus was on trial, Pilate knew it wasn't right. Pilate's wife warned him, I've had dreams, I've had nightmares of these things. And here Herod, after the fact, this is a flashback. This is the reason that he thinks that John the Baptist has come back from the dead. And it says because that he had thrown John in prison and put him in prison for his wife Herodias' sake, which is his brother Philip, Herod Philip's ex-wife. And they had gotten married. So for John said unto him, it's not right what you're doing here. This is a wrong thing. This is really, according to the law of Moses, it is an incestual relationship. You are not to have your brother's wife. And so he, in boldness, John proclaimed the truth and warned them of this terrible sin. May I say right here, it takes courage, doesn't it, to confront sin. Sometimes some of the most influential and powerful people need to be told the truth of God. And John the Baptist in that model of courage shows us that it would cost him his life, but it was worth taking a stand for God. In verse 5, and when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. This verse is very important. It's going to come back into play in just a moment. The only reason he wanted to kill him, the only reason he hadn't killed him yet, is because he feared the people. It was a political decision to not kill John the Baptist. Oh, he wanted to. He wanted to take his life. But the multitude counted John the Baptist as a very popular prophet. Notice there, here is the occasion that prompts the follow-through with what Herod really wanted to do. Herod's birthday. And on Herod's birthday, Herodias had her daughter, not Herod Antipas's daughter, it would be his stepdaughter now. He had it, and the word here, it means little girl. Some people have speculated that the little girl may be from anywhere from 10 to 13 years old. Just a little girl. And she was dancing for Herod on his birthday. It says there it pleased Herod. And then notice in verses 7 and 8, he makes a promise, and it is a terrible decision. He promised the little girl that he would give her whatever she had asked. And Herodias had coached the little girl beforehand. When your stepfather asks you whatever you want, you need to tell him that you want the head of John the Baptist. And that's what she asked for. In verse 8 it says, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger, and that means on a plate, on a platter. And notice there in verses 9 through 12 how John's life comes to an end. And the king was sorry. And don't start to feel sorry for Herod as if he really regrets taking his life. He doesn't regret taking his life. What he is regretting here is having to follow through on the promise, and now it is going to cost him possibly politically. His fear in taking John the Baptist's life is a political fear. He fears the multitude. But nevertheless, because he had made the promise, for the oath's sake, and them that which sat with that meat, he commanded it to be given her. All these people had watched Herodias' daughter dance, and then they had heard Herod say, whatever you want, darling, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. He has made this promise in a public manner, and now he realizes, I've got to save face here, and I've got to follow through with this promise. And he sent, and he beheaded John in the prison. And John's head was brought on a platter and presented to the little girl. I don't know about you, but the depravity in this whole scene and episode is at a height that it is hard to really imagine. A little girl carrying a head of John the Baptist on a plate and taking it back to the chambers where her mother awaits on it, and they are all pleased with this outcome. The frolicking and the laughing and the drinking and the partying that's going on in the midst of John the Baptist losing his head. Notice in verse 12, his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. Just as John was the forerunner of Jesus in his ministry, now John is a foreshadowing or a forerunner in the death of Christ. There are so many parallels and similarities between this. It is in the hands of rulers and sinful men, and they do so in a regretful way, but they do end up executing John the Baptist, and they will end up executing Jesus in a similar horrific way. And their rejection and unjust treatment will be sorted out one day, and they will stand before God and they will give an answer. I want to ask you this morning, are you ready? You say, ready for what? I'm saved. Are you ready? Because, first of all, if you're not saved, you will have to give an answer to how you responded to the gospel message. Herod heard the gospel. He heard about Jesus. He lived beyond this time, and no doubt there was probably preachers that came around. The people of Nazareth heard the gospel, and they made their decision. The Pharisees had heard the gospel, and they also rejected Christ. What will you do with this decision and responding to the gospel message? If you have responded positively and placed your faith in Christ, are you ready? Because you may face harsh treatment, cruel treatment, and persecution. Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted. We will undoubtedly face persecution in our life. I want to give you an example here as we come to a close of one with fruit in their life. By the way, I didn't dwell on it this morning, but there's a lot of parallels between the parable of the sower and how Jesus taught the parable of the sower and this real life story here. Herod, or people like Herod, did not love or care about the people of God. People like Herod did not love or care about the preachers of the kingdom. People like Herod did not have any concern about the growth of the kingdom. This wasn't even entering their mind. And people like Herod did not, they refused to acknowledge the hand of God working through the lives of others. God's hand was working through the life of Jesus and John the Baptist, and they were both rejected. They had no fruit. On the other hand, these characteristics are the fruit that follows those who have responded in faith. People who have responded in faith, they do care about the preaching of the kingdom. They care about the advancing and the furthering and the fulfillment of the kingdom. They care about what God is doing in other people's lives. This is the fruit that Jesus was talking about at the end of the parable of the sower. Some 30-fold, some 60-fold, some 100-fold. And here you see in Herod's life, there's no fruit. It is dead. And he will answer one day for what he did to John the Baptist and Pilate and those who brought Jesus under the authorities, the Roman authorities, will answer how they responded to the preaching of the gospel. As we stand and as we have a song of invitation, I invite you to respond. Maybe it's that you have not been saved and today is the day that you want to give your life to Christ. Maybe today is a day where you know that you need to rededicate your life, where you have not been bearing fruit. You know that you have placed your faith in Him, that you are saved, but you've not been living as a child of God should. I ask you this morning to respond however the Holy Spirit may be leading you this morning as we sing.